like to introduce Chris DiMeglio to you all. Chris is a senior Unified Mindfulness coach, and he's the first in our super group sessions in terms of guests who is coming from us from a meditation point of view rather than a running point of view. So Chris, normally we have runners who impart their wisdom to us, but I thought it'd be absolutely brilliant to bring somebody in to talk to us on a bit of a higher level in regards to the meditation work that we're doing. So I met Chris coming up to 12 months ago. Chris was a facilitator at that session, at that course, and I think it went for about 12 or 13 weeks. So got to know Chris really well, and got to hear about Chris's significant background in terms of meditation. And I guess in terms of meditation, I was listening to a podcast about a week ago, and the presenter spoke about meditators sort of being on about 3 different levels, and you had sort of beginner meditators who he said had potentially been sort of meditating up to about 3, 4 or 5 years, and then above that you had sort of medium level meditators, and then above that you sort of had Olympic level meditators, and he sort of put the Dalai Lama at the top of those Olympic level meditators, and it just really made me think, like, I guess there's nothing I've ever had where I just feel like I'm just scratching the surface, like every day in regards to meditation, it just seems like a new learning opportunity, and I'd love to know how to best harness that. And it would be fantastic if somebody could just say, look, just go and read that book and you will know it all. But I certainly still feel that I'm very much in that meditator segment that podcaster was talking about. So it's fantastic to have Chris with us, who I know has a far richer background in meditation than any of us have. So Chris, perhaps you could just start by giving us a little bit of an introduction in terms of how you started meditating and what your journey's been like.
Sure. Thanks, Rob, and good to be with you all. Thanks for having me over into your homes. I'll just say that one of our teachers, Shinzen Young, talks about the first 20 years being the beginning of your meditation practice. So I'm still a beginner completely in that sense. In a way, it was a relief to hear, like, oh, great, I still get to be a beginner. So I've been practicing about 15 years, something like that. And got started in grad school for me, looking at some of the struggles of life. One of the moments, there wasn't one moment that turned me from non-meditator to meditator, but one of them that often sticks in my mind was I was studying music at the time. I still play music. I play the trumpet and sing and play in a lot of different kinds of groups. And I remember this moment in the parking lot of the music school where it just really hit me that so many of the wonderful musicians that I was really just kind of so admiring of and thought so highly of, and I could only imagine being as proficient as they were. It struck me so deeply that they weren't necessarily all happy people. Some of them had very troubled backgrounds and troubled lives. died really young from, abusing their bodies or just tragedy. Some had mental health issues and a hard time with life. So it just showed me very clearly that being a great musician is not necessarily the same line on the chart as being a happy person, even though there can be a correlation, of course, between happiness and being proficient in something. So I said, what am I supposed to do? Another one of those was kind of not a specific time, but generally realizing that a lot of the adults in my life didn't have all the answers. Have you ever realized that? That a lot of the people that you've looked up to, they might have a lot to offer you, but they didn't have all the answers. They were confused about certain things just as much as I was. They didn't know why we were here. They didn't always know how to handle stress. They often didn't. So for me, these are some of the types of things, along with some life challenges, dealing with feeling alienated from lots of people, feeling confused, feeling marginalized in some ways, and just wanting to live a great life. I was like, what would it mean to live a really good life? Excuse me, I'm just getting over a little sinus infection thing. Some of these kinds of reflections impelled me to pursue a little more inner exploration. So I found a few little books on Zen, and literally went to the local library and took out some books that just seemed interesting on the shelf without any real background about what they would be like, and started sitting quietly by myself in my room, gradually finding a couple of teachers and friends. It was actually remarkable, several years in, being able to talk to someone about meditation practice after having kind of played around in a confused way for a couple of years by myself. And ultimately really decided to take it very seriously. I started going to this local monastery, local meaning 3 or 4 hours away, not that local. This Buddhist monastery in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master. And then I spent a summer there, and then I spent a year living there. And at that point, I was taking classes with lots of other teachers. But for that year, I moved out of my place in New York, gave up my work, and just lived there, not as a monk, but as a lay resident. And from there, began training to to share practice with others. Did a bunch of trainings, continued lots of studying and practice. Have done many retreats, including a month or 6 weeks of silence, and still rolling along, scratching the surface in different places sometimes. Once in a while, thinking that I'm scratching a little below the surface, not sure. And it is an adventure. It's really kind of incredible. Look from the outside, it looks like the opposite of an adventure. You're just either sitting still or going about your normal business. But from the inside, there is, for me, a spirit of discovery and exploration and curiosity and possibility that haven't gotten old yet, and hope they don't have it. Hope it doesn't. So I'm teaching actively now. That's my main work, along with playing music, teaching and guiding and organizing practice communities. So how's that, Rob, for a little background? Oh, you're muted still.
No, that's fantastic, Chris. So when did you come across Unified Mindfulness?
This was 2016, so not actually that long ago. Yeah, a little over 5 years ago, I guess, from a friend and coach at the time, called Shinzen, teacher's teacher. And yeah, I was just excitedly sharing about him. So checked it out, went right on a retreat.
Yeah, I see that in quite a few of the more senior people within Unified Mindfulness, that they have come from practicing other techniques before Unified Mindfulness.
Yeah, I think Unified Mindfulness as a framework, most people here have studied it a little bit, right? Some of the different techniques.
Definitely.
Yeah, it is really unique in that, and I'm not trying to claim that it's the one best system. If someone ever tells you that, you might want to walk the other way. But one thing that I think is very unique to it is that instead of saying, here's our approach, here are the meditation techniques we do, it does that, but it also says, and here's how we like to think about the entire spectrum of possibilities for meditation. And in addition to saying, here are some techniques, and perhaps even more importantly, it's kind of a master key or a framework in which to understand and place just about any possible way of approaching contemplative practice. So I think for people who have done a little bit of this teacher, a little bit of that, and gone deeper with this teacher, how do I make sense of it all? Unified Mindfulness is the best place I've found to make sense of it all. And show that we're not just doing different things and digging shallow holes in many different places. We are actually doing one thing.
Right. Yeah. So in terms of everybody that's on this session tonight, they've all been introduced to Unified Mindfulness, and some of these guys have been practicing coming up to 12 months. And others have maybe just been introduced in the last few weeks. So there's a wide spectrum of experience, and as part of the work that we do together, we concentrate on the 5 main techniques that are taught, and in terms of the amount of meditation that people do, a number of people would be meditating on sort of that 10 minutes a day type level, but then I know there are a number of people who are meditating for an hour at a time, a number of times a week. So I'd like, perhaps if I just start off the questions in relation to meditation, and it's one that interests me, in terms of what is the right dose for meditation, right? So I guess runners are a little bit different, right? Because we have a running plan, and the running plan says go out and run for 3 hours. So we go out and run for 3 hours. Yeah. So if somebody could say, okay, you need to meditate for X minutes a week, we would all gladly follow. What's your take on that? And how much do you meditate a week, Chris?
Yeah, cool. I think maybe before I just give you a bunch of numbers, the maybe one difference between running and meditation is that you're very clearly running and very clearly not running at any given time. And with meditation, there are some either middle gray areas or times that are informal, as some of you might know about, or kind of easing into practice, and it's not necessarily not practice or practice. I do about an hour a day on most average days when I'm not on a retreat of formal sitting, but I do a lot of other practice. I often have walks in the evening or at some point during the day when it kind of becomes either a very intentional formal practice, or I just notice after a while, oh, I'm just practicing now, and I kind of let that continue. So, and then many informal moments, many brief check-ins, some background practice, and so it does end up being a little more than that typically.
Sure.
And yeah, I wouldn't say it's easy to define what one should do, and that could be something to pull together in a group of people if you all know each other and support each other. But I would say it is maybe more individualized, although I would imagine running is quite individualized too. I used to run a little bit. I'm not anywhere near anyone here's level of proficiency. I could run around the block a few times and enjoy it. I think the most I ever did was 5 or so miles. That was 20 years ago. uh, uh, I think it's, what would it be interesting to you? What would be helpful to you? These are the kind of questions that you might ask. One teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, says, sit down for 5 minutes, and if you're enjoying it, keep going. Shinzen is more about a plan, for your day or for your week. Have some clarity of intention. Keeping some plan in place can be empowering. To say for the next week, okay, I've been meditating 15 minutes a day. Next week I'm going to do 25 minutes a day. And I'm going to commit to that plan. Just like, I imagine there's a certain sense of commitment that you all have as athletes, and there's probably an energizing sense to that has you feel, oh wow, I might be able to do that. Ooh, I didn't know I could do that. I hadn't thought of it. And so maybe it feels a little scary to do 25 minutes if you've been doing 15, or an hour if you've been doing 40. But the thought, oh wow, I could do that. At least I'll learn something. I'm not sure what it'll be like. I might not love every minute of it, but I'll almost certainly learn something. And I may indeed feel empowered by it. And I encourage people generally to think about this in terms of not, you should be doing this in order to be, have your act together, but instead kind of flip it into a positive, what would feel exciting, what would feel motivating, and knowing that there is always more to learn and grow from. Have that attitude of, this could be kind of cool. Just for this week, I'm going to do this number of minutes of sitting, and then make sure I do 3 micro hits or something. These are short practices, anywhere from 10 seconds to just under 10 minutes. So how does that sound, Rob?
Yeah, no, that's great, Chris. That's terrific feedback. All right, well, I think we might open it up to some questions. So yeah, who's going to go first?
I'll go first. Chris, few questions. Since you've been doing it for 15 years, I mean, when you started out, was it sort of little bite sizes of meditation and sort of experimenting, and that's developed over the years? That's the first question. The second one is, what have been the noticeable impact that you've seen in your life after 15 years of meditation? Could you summarize that?
Sure, I could try. First, the answer to the first question is yes, for sure. This kind of little bit at a time, experimenting in different ways. And honestly, I still love the spirit of experimentation and exploration as a way to go. It doesn't mean you have to be shifting your technique every 3 seconds, but this spirit of curiosity and openness to what happens, and you never know what might happen and what you might learn. I think the biggest shift is that I believe my thoughts less. That I'm less often there are voices in our head. And do they represent truth? And do they represent a true judgment of who I am and what I should be doing or not? And I think just about everyone will sometimes believe those thoughts that, you might as well give up because of this, or that, you really didn't get enough done today, or whatever the thoughts might say, or you really let down that other person, or I think I believe those thoughts less often. I know that I do. That's perhaps the biggest shift I could name. Maybe I'll just leave it there for the sake of brevity, and I tend to try to say everything that comes to mind at once. So I'll experiment. This is also part of my experimentation. I'll just say that one thing for now.
Can I ask the question that to encourage everyone who's on this meditation journey? Can I ask, right? Do you think you're a happier person after 15 years?
I do. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Yeah, there's very little doubt about that. And, to be fair, I also went from being 20 something to 40 something, and learned, went through a lot of other changes and developments in life that might also have contributed to happiness. So I'm always careful to make any unwarranted claims, but the idea of untangling some of the confusion in the mind and opening to the possibility of let's say, understanding oneself and as more than just this atomized person and lost on a cold planet, and exploring with curiosity what might be seen as ordinary experience, but with a sense of real interest and exploration. These kinds of things certainly lend themselves to happiness. Noticing moments when I can pause before reacting and decide that instead of going down this particular groove of mental habit, that I'll take this path, which means that I don't vent in a frustrated way to my dad, or that I don't judge myself in a harsh way, and instead bring on compassion or just curiosity. Noticing those moments very regularly, or moments of just taking a simple walk and having, I even felt it just now as I described it and imagined it, just moments of feeling like life is absolutely magical. Those didn't happen necessarily on their own, and there seems very clearly to be a connection to the mindfulness practice when just taking a walk and the trees look like magic. And I don't mean I'm on drugs, or it's like I'm on drugs, but a sense of wonder and presence and joy and connection, or even in moments of feeling really down, having a sense of being able to call upon resources that have been cultivated over a long time, and bring upon a tool that feels like I'm almost walking with a close friend who's helping me through it, even though I'm walking by myself. All these types of experiences and types of tools, to me, certainly add up to a happier sense of happier life.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Who would like to go next? Bill.
Hey, Chris. Just wondering if you sort of find yourself sort of mixing and matching. You've got a lot of experience over the years, many different techniques, many different teachings and things like that. Do you find yourself sort of mixing and matching techniques, like depending on where you might be with your mood or the time of day or anything like that?
Yeah, I personally do. Yeah. Some people like to mostly have one practice or a couple of different options, and that's what works for them. And that's great. There's no single way to do it that I've come across, but I personally do find I often think of it as this is my psycho-spiritual toolbox that I'm carrying around. And there are, quite a few different options in there. And given the moment, what feels just like it's naturally feeling interesting, or maybe there's a certain need available that's present. I mentioned this kind of hard moment. I'm actually picturing a moment from a few weeks ago of walking on the beach. I was in a beautiful, beautiful place, like away for a weekend, but I was feeling some deep emotions kind of stirred up. And that was a time when there was some kind of self-compassion and reflecting on thinking type practices that felt most useful. So yes, yeah, I do find it okay. I mean, there's a difference between a clear reflection on, or even an intuitive reflection on what feels most useful and interesting at a given moment, and feeling like you're being batted around by options. That latter kind of approach isn't as helpful. But the former of having, a rich array of possibilities and choosing from those given the circumstances, I think makes sense. And I'll just say, since I brought it up, one antidote to feeling battered around by options is having a go-to practice. If I don't know what to do, I will do this. And that's actually very helpful, because it means that when you don't know what to do, you actually do know what to do.
Yeah. I was going to say as well, do you find yourself, you sort of settle in for one sort of technique or session and you go, well, this isn't working for me, so you switch it up at certain times or anything like that as well?
Yeah, that does happen. And I think it's nice to be able to do that with some consciousness. You may have heard Shinzen Young's framework of being motivated by interest, opportunity, necessity, trying not to be motivated by craving, aversion, and unconsciousness. And then the last part of that is try not to make a big deal about the decision. And so those are the 7 7, that's right, I can count. 7 part framework for deciding on what to do. Interest, opportunity, necessity, yes. Craving, aversion, unconsciousness, try not to be pushed around by those.
Yeah.
And then try not to make a big deal about it. So yes, during a practice session, there may be a sense of something is either, often for me, it's like I'm doing a certain practice, but it's almost like someone's tapping me on the shoulder. It's like, well, you haven't quite paid attention. Something that kind of needs your attention back here. Whether that's a curious thing that I'm really excited to explore, or a painful feeling that that's not being addressed by the technique, or a sense of being distracted easily given the framework I've been working within. So from there, you might say, what do I need? What might be helpful now? What am I feeling interested in? Yeah. Is that your experience too, Bill?
Yeah. I've noticed, especially when I'm running, because Rob's been sort of walking us through, employing Shinzen Young's techniques while we're out running as well. But I find myself sort of reverting as well during that time whilst using that technique. So add in sort of different breathing techniques and things like that as well while I'm running, to try and, I guess, motivate or to bring about a meditative state as well while I'm running. Because my personal life, I've got a lot of sort of mental health issues and things like that as well. So I've got this constant narrative going on in my head. And so for me, trying to not so much drown that out, but organize it and get it into place requires many different steps. So, being able to have that toolbox, like you said, is actually quite useful.
Wow, cool. So it sounds like that basically works for you to be able to.
Yeah. So just try, different one from here, and then sort of patch it onto that, and then patch it onto that, sort of almost make your own kaleidoscope of a technique in itself, but work within, the Unified Mindfulness technique.
Love it. Yeah,
cool.
And I resonate with the kaleidoscope image of shifting experience, and then sometimes the approach to it can shift too. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Chris, Shaylee is away on vacation at the moment and sent through a list of questions, and one of them relates to Bill's comment, and that was around breathing meditation techniques.
Yeah.
And I know you studied Thich Nhat Hanh's techniques quite significantly, and that appears to be very breathing focused. So do you still use those techniques?
I do, yeah. I do, yeah. And I saw Shailee's questions, and I was going to mention if there was a teacher, I think that was part of it, any teachers I'd recommend following for breathing meditations. Thich Nhat Hanh is the one that comes to mind first, for sure. And as I mentioned, he's a Vietnamese Zen monk, still around, actually. And let's see, was there a particular question about how to integrate those, or thoughts on breathing meditation?
I was more interested on whether you were still using those techniques on a regular basis in addition to your Unified Mindfulness techniques.
Yes, yeah. I guess I'm trying to reflect on my experience there. Let's say the explicit use of the techniques is a little more occasional for me. And occasionally I'll even go to groups that are in his tradition. So there are lots of groups. I even started one in New York, and a lot of them are on Zoom right now. So one could easily kind of check out his approach in live groups. And if people are interested in that, I could try to find some information and send it to Rob, so you can check that out. But there's probably there's definitely a lot on YouTube and online about this teacher and his approach. But finding letting simple breath meditation be part of practice for me can be really restorative. One of my foundations. It can kind of be, again, something that I don't necessarily go to all the time, but that can feel like a home base has been reclaimed. Yeah, it can be quite soothing and lovely to incorporate. And I guess I just want to say in fairness to Thich Nhat Hanh, not that anybody has said anything or I've said anything ill about him, but he does move from breath meditation into a variety of contemplations and practices based on loving kindness and various other things. So there is quite a bit in his approach too. And interestingly, he does kind of combine a variety of techniques or even traditions himself. So it's kind of cool to see that some of the teachers I've explored, and I think many modern teachers have taken from various sources of inspiration to find a collection of practices that they wish to present to the world.
Great. Okay, who's next? No other questions for the moment?
No, Chris. Sorry, I'm fascinated about Thich Nhat Hanh. When you spent that year, I take it that was in upstate New York. Was it the village? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Even though you were there as a lay individual, was it more Buddhist centric or it was more meditative in terms of, you know, the philosophy that they were trying to transfer? And what did you take out of that and compared to Unified Mindfulness?
An overarching approach there is bringing mindfulness into everyday life. So you might think of a monastery as totally silent and people are sitting cross-legged 12 hours a day. That might be an impression of a monastery. There was some of that, a lot of silence and a good bit of sitting, but most of the time was not sitting still. Most of the time is either cooking or working or taking walks and or having conversations, and with the idea that mindfulness can be part of what we bring into everyday life. And part of this, what Thich Nhat Hanh calls engaged Buddhism, was born out of the war in Vietnam in the 60s and 70s, where there was an active crisis in his country at the time, and he felt that he couldn't just sit there, and found ways to continue his practice while engaged and in motion and starting social service organizations and working with refugees and all that, seeing if practice could be maintained throughout those types of situations. So for us at the monastery, there thankfully wasn't such a crisis going on most of the time, but there was this intention to bring a sense of mindfulness into just, walking from here to get a fork in the kitchen, sipping one's tea, having a conversation, can, as many moments as possible throughout the day, be mindful. And so that's one of the kind of pillars that how I see that undergird that practice. And another is community life practice. Can all the interactions and even the challenges of living in community with folks be kind of folded into a sense of practice? How do we live harmoniously? So it's very practical in a lot of ways, but I'll say, and also largely Buddhist oriented in terms of the teachings that inspired it. A lot of what Unified Mindfulness does is also inspired by some Buddhist teachings. It just happens to be kind of reformulated and combined with other things and presented in a way that's a little more open and digestible to people of any background. And a relationship that is that both of these traditions emphasize the possibility of practicing anytime. In fact, Shinzen Young, you may have heard this, he sometimes talks about monasticizing your life, that even if you don't live in a monastery, which most of us won't, that we can find ways to let the ordinary, again, the so-called ordinary moments, be moments of living deeply. And that's a Thich Nhat Hanh kind of way of speaking, but I think it definitely resonates with Unified Mindfulness. And sometimes you'll hear Shinzen talk about particularly on his program called the Life Practice Program. You know, he says here, in the book of your life, you know, today is one chapter, and we let it be a page turner. And the way I think he means that is not that you should necessarily have wild adventures every day. The way I hear that is that can we take interest in and really get to know the details of and enjoy the exploration of a day. And I really love that. It's actually inspiring even just to talk about it, this idea of having what could feel like and maybe even look like a humdrum ordinary day of doing this and washing the dish and doing some work. Actually, in the background, there's this stealth mindfulness practice happening, which can make your day more enjoyable, less stressed, and also part of an over a lifelong process of kind of deepening this sense of getting to know oneself and the world. How does that sound? Did I reply to what you asked, John?
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. I'm, you know, I get the impression. I mean, I'm very new at this. That mindful meditation and mindfulness is really trying to reorientate the brain to sort of turn to a more simplistic way. I'm probably not expressing it correctly. But by getting to that level, you sort of develop some level of gratitude about what you have in your life, which then leads to that kind of happiness we all search for. But, you know, we try and find it in other ways that never seem to fulfill that need. I don't know. Is that, you know, it's training that mind. It's that toolbox you talk about all the time, but it takes time because our mind's constantly, you know, being bombarded. We, you know, as Rob would say, you know, you get thoughts coming in, but you got to learn to accept things with equanimity in terms of trying to just reorientate back to you just can't empty the brain in 5 seconds flat, you know.
Yes, I think
correct sort of.
Yeah, so I think you're basically checking in with how to view mindfulness generally as, you know, is it simplifying, is it gratitude, and is it all of it? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah, it's well, it may not be great, but it may lead you to all those parts in terms of you know, like you gave the example, when you take a walk and you get into that automatic meditation or mindfulness level, everything becomes more vivid. It becomes more alive, as you said. So isn't that, you wouldn't have enjoyed that walk as much, except for the way your brain is now orientated. And that brings joy. Yeah.
I think I'm resonating with what I'm hearing. Having a mindfulness path where we're learning to be a little more focused on what we're intending to focus on or what's relevant in a given moment. Also being a little clearer in the senses about what's going on inside and outside, and also being less pushed around by blind habits of wanting this, not wanting that, but being a little more open to experience as it is. Those do seem to add up to a richer experience where it's easier to appreciate life and easier to avoid some of the patterns of confusion and suffering.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm just beginning in that, but one would hope that as the brain gets, you know, more in trained, I suppose trained's not the right word, but, you know, as you practice more, it becomes, as you said, more second nature, I suppose.
I think it does. Yes. Yeah. And, you know, sometimes I use the word training. It can feel a little cold, but I think it's, you know, if training to you is associated with something that you love, then I think it's okay to think about it as training, as long as it's not too goal oriented, like, well, one day I'll get to there, you know, and now I'm a hopeless case, but one day I'll get to somewhere else.
I mean, in our case, it's obviously ultra running, but it has great benefit that it affects us in all aspects of our lives, I suppose, you know.
Yes, yeah, that's how I think many people come to practice for one reason, and then they realize, oh, this is something I can apply everywhere. Wow, how cool is that?
Yeah.
And I also want to just briefly step back to avoid giving an expectation. At least in my experience, it's not the case that you know, people who have been meditating for 15 years or whatever, they're not just walking on a cloud and everything is roses every day. It's still human life where it's like, oh, you get sick, you know, you have too much work to do, you know, you like you break the thing you were about to bring to your friend, and now you have to like clean up the, you know, whatever, you know, all this stuff is going to happen. Or you just randomly feel a surge of emotions that are not desirable in that moment, and
Yeah.
you know, so it's, I, you know, in many ways, you know, I can totally get why Shinzen would say first 20 years is the beginner phase. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm happy to be a beginner, because there are going to be moments when I don't seem to know what I'm doing. You know, I thankfully typically, you know, have enough in the toolbox that I'll let something start to come online in terms of a practice or approach. Doesn't mean I'll immediately just feel like everything is one per se, but typically there's a sense of, okay, here's a process.
I can give you a tip. Meditation doesn't make you run faster.
Oh. Oh, maybe everyone should quit then. Just kidding.
No. It's the enjoyment of running that you would hope to develop.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some of Rob's Facebook posts about all this. It's very beautiful and inspiring to see the impact of practice.
Yeah, sorry.
Thanks. No worries. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
And another one of Shaylee's questions, and I think it's one that resonates with pretty well all of us, and that was, some days it's harder to settle into the meditation than others. On these days where your mind wanders easily, or you find it harder to stay in meditation, what do you suggest you do to make the most of the meditation session?
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to be a little spontaneous and ask if anybody else has a response that comes to mind for you. What do you do when you feel like it's hard to concentrate, and how do you make the most of a session? Maybe you could type in the chat what you do, and we're going to see if maybe we can crowdsource part of a response for Shiley. But I'll share my 2 cents while we see if anybody is interested in giving your 2 cents at the same time. In a way, from, you know, one of the changes for me that's happened compared, let's say 10 years ago compared to now, is that I think 10 years ago, if I sat down and I was very distracted, I assumed that I was doing it wrong, and that something was going wrong, and I had to retool my whole approach, or try to find a new book, or talk to a teacher. And now when I sit down and I feel like my mind is all over the place and it's hard to concentrate, honestly, usually it's just like, okay, that's what today's like. It's seen as less of I don't see it as a problem, you know. It might be it's information, you know, and maybe it means there's something I want to look at, or some kind of practice that I might want to check in with. But typically it's just, okay, today is like this. And to me, that would be my main, if I had to just give one piece of advice from my experience, it would be when you have those days, and even if it's very frequent, maybe it's most days, right, at a certain point where you feel like it's really hard to stay focused, your mind is wandering easily all the time. My main advice would be, is it possible? Ask yourself, is it possible to be okay with that? It's kind of like, I was excited for my morning run, but now it's raining and cold, so I'm going to do the run, but I'm going to not be as happy. We could do the run and say, okay, I'm going to go out in the rain. That's kind of cool. or maybe you don't go, and that's also okay. You know, so with this, it's like, okay, I sat down and maybe I wanted to have some super peaceful moment, and now I have a very busy mind. Okay, I have a busy mind. So as much as you can experiment with that approach, that is definitely the type of thing that has an impact on every part of your life. What we're talking about is equanimity. So equanimity, even with the busy mind. In terms of practicality, you can try spoken labels if it's a technique that involves labeling, even if that's just following your breath in, out, say it out loud, in, out. It could be see, hear, feel with the label see, hear, feel. If you notice yourself doing some self-criticism, you might be aware of that and might be aware that, this is just a sentence in my mind. It's not necessarily representative of anything true. The sound in my mind that says, you don't know what you're doing, or geez, everyone else is better than you. Those are just sounds of the mind. Try your best not to listen, please. The only voices that are true are the ones that are compassionate. And so the voices that are telling you there's something wrong with you are coming from confusion or suffering. So others chimed in. Kelly wrote, stop early and try again later in the day. So that's one option. If things are totally unpleasant, you could decide to stop early and go at a different time in the day. John mentioned, I've learned to accept that it will happen and accept it and just refocus sometimes for the whole session. I do not give up part of the journey. There's no right or wrong. So that's kind of what I was pointing to. So there are various options. I would say you can play with it. I do find it helpful when I decided to sit down for, let's say we said we're going to sit for 25 minutes. I think it's helpful unless there's an extreme problem to just commit to that. You know, and if there was some huge distress or huge physical pain, no problem, you could adjust or move. But I think it's generally helpful to see what it's like to keep going for that time. And then, you know, the worst thing that happens is you learn a little bit about sitting through distraction. But it is totally fine also, Kelly, to just try again another time. You know, maybe you'll regroup and feel more refreshed after dinner or something.
Guys, we've got 5 minutes left of Chris's time. So does anybody else have another question, or otherwise we'll go to another one of Shaylee's?
I have a quick question. How would you choose like which technique to use? Do you have a method to know like which technique to use for that particular session on that day, depending on how you're feeling or what's happened in your life at that time?
Yeah. Well, they're basically two approaches, although they're not necessarily different. One is that framework I mentioned before when talking with Bill, this interest, opportunity, necessity framework that Shinzen developed, and it spells the word ION if you want to remember, ION, interest, opportunity, necessity. So those are ways of being motivated to practice, and then trying not to be motivated by craving, aversion, unconsciousness. In other words, trying not to be just pushed around by random confusion or striving, I should be doing this and that. And then try not to make a big deal about the decision, knowing that no matter what choice you land on, it's all good. You're going to be learning something either way. But you know, that's kind of one framework. Sometimes for me, and rather than going through all those steps, it's just a matter of pausing. What do I need right now? And letting that be a little more intuitive, you know, and that to me doesn't contradict that first framework. In fact, it can incorporate it. It's just, what do I need right now? What do I want right now? It's like you're going to choose what you're going to have from a menu at the diner, or what type of pizza you're going to order. I'm not sure what people typically eat, but do I want this? Oh, I love spinach on my pizza. Oh, that sounds exciting. Then you can go for that. Does that help at all, Kelly?
Yeah, I think I think the like what do I need now kind of helps, and often we do one, so I don't do the other guys, but like feel flow at the end of a run because our body's all sort of hyped up and like feeling stuff. So I find that one's good at the end of a run.
Cool. Yeah.
But that's, yeah, based on just because your body's all warm and moved and could be in a bit of pain, maybe. We feel your muscles.
Yeah, love it. A related approach is kind of as if you were asking a child or a dear friend, you know, what they needed. You know, you might just check in. Maybe they're having a hard day, or maybe they're having a great day. Just, what do you think you'd like right now? What would make this a good afternoon? You know, and they might say, oh, I think I want to go to the park, or I just need to lie down. Okay, great. And you're, you know, taking the role of the good friend. To me, you almost can't go wrong in terms of how to steer your practice, being, you know, but taking on that, I am the good friend to this self here.
Okay, well, we're nearly out of time, Chris, so I think we'll end it there. As I thought would be the case, the time was way too short, and I feel like we could have had a multi-day retreat and just kept going. But really appreciate your input, and thank you so much for coming along and attending this session.
My real pleasure. This was super fun. Great to meet you all. I did see there might have been one or two lingering questions, so feel free to reach out to me. You can share my email, if you have it, Robin. If you don't, I can message it to you.
Sure.
If there's any follow-ups or questions that you were hoping to ask or comments you were hoping to make. But otherwise, wow, great to be in a room of athletes. I admire and wish I could learn from you all about your physical exercise. I'm the mental exercise guy right now. So, but I appreciate this. This was super fun, and thank you for your welcome and patience and presence and curiosity, and happy practicing, everybody.
Fantastic.